Record. Are we recording? I think, yeah, we're recording. All right. Welcome back, everyone. All of you for the long-awaited chapter that I read a long time ago, but thankfully I have notes for. Caliban the Witch, The Struggle Against the Rebel Body, Chapter 2. All right, so where should we start it here? Let's start here from...
Well, right in the first paragraph, she says, just read that because she kind of says what she's going to do. One of the preconditions for capitalist development was the process that Michel Foucault defined as the disciplining of the body, which in my view consisted of an attempt by state and church to transform the individual's powers into labor power. This chapter examines how this process was conceived and mediated in the philosophical debates of the time and the strategic interventions which it generated.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so again, this is kind of in the transition period where, and I think this is, now that I've revisited kind of Marx again, I think there is like this this kind of closer historical look as this redefinition of labor power was kind of missing in Marx. So she's kind of doing that through Foucault, and labor power is very important, of course, because that's the surplus theory of value is relying on it. So yeah, so that's what we're doing. And where are we? And we're starting with kind of the birth of mercantile bourgeois here. So let me read, I guess, this part that I've lined up. Maybe this is in the 17th century, what in the Prosperio remains a subliminal foreboding is formalized as conflict between reason and the passions of the body, which reconceptualize classic Judeo-Christian themes to reproduce a new anthropological paradigm. The outcome is reminiscent of the medieval skirmishes between angels and devils for the possessions of the departed soul, but the conflict is now staged within the person, who's reconstructed as a battlefield where opposite elements clash for domination on the one side and their forces of reason, parsimony, prudence, sense of responsibility, self-control, and on the other, the low instincts of the body, lewdness, idleness, systematic dissipation of one's vital energies. The battle is fought on the many fronts because reason must be vigilant against the attacks of the carnal self and prevent the wisdom of the flesh. Maybe I didn't need to read all that. But as I'm reading, I kind of had a couple of thoughts on this. Especially, I think anybody that goes through kind of philosophical training, by the time you kind of hit you go from the kind of the late medieval philosophy into kind of age of enlightenment. And I have here like Spinoza and Descartes into modern philosophy, if you will. Suddenly there is this this depiction of body does change as she's saying it, she's describing it. And it has this kind of religious, but also biological tone to it, right? You start talking about the gland in the brain that could, you know, is connected to the soul or the humors of the body. But then there is this clash within the body itself. Does that resonate with you all at all?
Yeah, I want to say it's even more mechanical, or whatever the technological analog of the time is to explain it, like with Descartes. it's all these gases, like you're saying, like a hydraulic movement almost, compared to the passions, which literally kind of, I always remember as you're passive, you're kind of controlled by them. They're not just emotions, they're emotions that are pulling you away from reason. Even going back further to like this is like even something in philosophy, and this kind of um, tension between reason and passions. Even Plato talks about it with the kind of chariot driver and the horses. One of the horses is the passions and wants to go off wildly, while the other one is, more is reason, and the chariot is trying to kind of control both of these horses.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we get out of dialectics is the ability to recognize the ways in which this is a consistent story, of course, right? I mean, we have like Aristotle's focus on optics sort of does a lot of this similar work. Then we have Plato's notions, and in some way, I think we can correctly situate the Cartesian mechanism, and then the later like Freudian libido, and then the modern and postmodern notions of the human brain as a computer analog, as this constant attempt to like say, yeah, sure, new thing, but like really just old thing. But I think that in the way that we storytell the Enlightenment, we specifically storytell the Enlightenment as this period of time in which in which this is becoming mechanized, again, remechanized, maybe materialized, or split into the Cartesian dualism of the time. I think it is very, very connected, as Federici says, to the movements of like anatomical theater and these kinds of things. Just sort of like fixating on whatever the current obsessions are and using it to retell the same story.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of and I don't want to jump ahead here because I think it's worth going ahead. I think what she's kind of setting up is, I mean, there is that genealogy that is important of how kind of looking at the body changes, but then you have this and we discussed it in the kind of the last sessions, the emergence of this new form of wage labor, which then need more and more, and even in slavery too, of kind of the management of body and how to kind of discipline it to extract the right type of energy out of it. But yeah, so I guess what we were talking about can I add to that?
I just wanted to point out too that like in that first paragraph, labor power for Marx is a social, it's I forget what the term is, but it's average labor power. It's a social group. It's not just this individual disciplining. And this chapter gets into that, how you're disciplining a whole like class, a whole social body of people, so that you don't have to use force every time to get someone to go to work, instead of being lewd and lazy,
or even have to say anything at all. At some point, like
it's internalized.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the other piece of the dialectic, is that on the one hand you have the historical part that we're like stitching back into a present movement that's trying to diverge from a history, from like a way things are being done, and maybe that sort of represents the liberatory potential of the Enlightenment. Retrospectively, it's difficult to sort of imagine that it had much liberatory potential, but I mean, I think it's fair to acknowledge that some reasonable amount of people engaged in what would later become these movements weren't villains. They're just sort of they are engaged in a radical project that gets sort of recuperated. But then the other part of that is like, why is it that this is recuperable to this past mode of power and control, sort of asymmetric or cognitive relationships, to use Brandam's words on this? And it's because this is a way to more effectively police a whole population than has ever been seen before, by internalizing this as a mind-body split, by mapping that analogy onto classes of populations, so that you can eventually get the managerial class as the mind of the body politic. You know, like it's always like both forward casting and retrospective when this dialectic is engaging, or like when we're engaging with the something new, right? Like the ways in which it recuperates the past is both to not change and change simultaneously.
Yeah, right. I mean, we see this in many spheres, of course. I mean, one thing we were talking about again now in kind of terms of law is like originalism,
Sure.
right? I mean, this idea of like, okay, or you know, I guess what I'm reading on the side right now about this textualism and rationalism in Islamic jurisprudence. Yeah, there's this idea of that of retaining the past, but in order to retain that past, you would have to kind of make it kind of conform to certain elements of today, and some out of necessity, right? I mean, it's not. I guess it just doesn't really matter at that point, but I guess, but Mark, you're applying that to Federici, or are you saying that this is what's happening at the time with kind of not just philosophy? I guess philosophy that back then is pretty much everything, right?
It is pretty much everything, right?
You're talking about sciences, politics.
Oh, it is for me.
Yeah.
Yes, but
I mean, I'm thinking about like
natural philosophy, maybe.
Yeah,
You're doing natural philosophy or theology, which are both kind of philosophy.
Yeah, and Leibniz and Descartes and these people, they're all kind of connected to power, and they're not just like writing treatises, they're working on other projects at the same time,
right?
Which makes the works also. Anyways, yeah, so you're saying that about philosophy at that point, or?
Well, just more so that like when we historicize philosophy at this point, and when we apply a sort of narrative to it, the narrative itself is a retrospective that
I see
is about how things changed but didn't, and the reason that they changed but didn't is because by changing, they revealed a new form of how to police more effectively.
I see. Okay.
It just like every technology, and I know the two of you know this, and this is, I think, always something I want to make sure that people are getting exposure to, the idea that technology, the techne, the skill, is not just, the artifact of technology. It's not just a cell phone, but also the management technique, or the political theory or whatever of the time. All of these technologies are value neutral, and that's probably a definitional part of technology. because then
Sure.
it's not capable of being value laden on its own. And because of that, because the technologies are being expanded, in this case, very social oriented technologies are being expanded by people who are not engaging with the sort of with like Ian Malcolm, the Jeff Goldblum's character from Jurassic Park, the sort of like never stop to ask if you should, or what's so great about exploration, the violent penetration of the natural world, right?
Right.
You know, I mean, the character is played off for gags, but like it is a legitimate and valid critique of scientism, of the like exploration for exploration's sake often results in the kinds of things that we see in the last 5 Star Trek movies, where somehow there's always a renegade admiral that manages to go and threaten an entire star system, right? Like you're not upending the power structure by upending the political technology. So when you put those tools into the hands of people who already have a vested interest, they're going to use it to maintain their vested interests.
Right. Yeah. 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 And I'm thinking about, I think in this other piece, James and I were reading, there's of course the Natalie Merchant's The Death of Nature, and she talks about like Francis Bacon's language, of course, of science has kind of a penetration of the world secrets, and you know, she's arguing about kind of the gendered language of it and how that kind of becomes entrenched in the scientific discourse, which is then borrowed into political discourse. I mean, they just kind of envelop each other off and on. Yes. So then I have here on kind of what did I write here? It's that for 134, I've written this note about that this development of reason versus carnal in this discourse is caused by the needs of the kind of by the capitalist development of capitalism and its social transformation. And here, the author acknowledges the aesthetics and after the factors and other factors, but as far as the political will of the state is concerned, the determinative is economic, and so there's this economic focus. And this is also reminds me of kind of Yanis Varoufakis, like when he talks about like the kind of mercantile class that is kind of developing still at this point. I mean, they are which some of them translate into the capitalist class after they develop the financial sector, that they're themselves pretty much hated because they're a front to the aristocracy. And some of them become the bourgeois, which become the capitalists, because there's now also this decoupling of political power from the economic power, right? Although there have been markets forever, like by the 16th, 17th century, you have a market that is kind of growing alongside of the state, where with its own influence, that is not just that is translating into private property, which is again something that hasn't existed up until a point, right? I mean, you either have property or you don't. You're either part of the aristocracy or you don't. As far as ownership, right? I mean, of course, people are using different kinds of land, but that development. Anyways, I guess I'm saying all of this to say that these distinctions, this kind of splits are happening everywhere. And it's a legitimate kind of description of this couple of hundred years in motion. Yeah. I was gonna go to the next page if there's there's comments or.
Yeah, I want to say,
Please.
I think there, having difficulty focusing on that. I'll skip that comment. I do have something on the next page though, 135.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, I think it's sort of to the notion about the value neutralness of a technology. Throughout this book so far, we've talked a number of times, or Federici's talked a number of times about the obsession with the witch's sabbat and these midnight licentious affairs, and we can, this is the moment, this is the transitional moment in the maybe 1650s where we start to see that this has become a body of data that can now be used as a supportive doctrine for the need to break circadian rhythms. And the breaking of circadian rhythms, the artificial, as on page 135, the second paragraph, it was in the attempt to form a new individual that the bourgeoisie engaged in that battle against the body that has become its historic mark. According to Weber, the reform of the body is at the core of the bourgeois ethic because capitalism makes acquisition the ultimate purpose of life instead of treating it as a means for the satisfaction of our needs. Thus, it requires that we forfeit all spontaneous enjoyment of life. Capitalism also attempts to overcome our, quote, natural state by breaking the barriers of nature and by lengthening the working days beyond the limits set by the sun, the seasonal cycles, and the body itself as constituted in pre-industrial society. So like we have this notion of breaking the circadian rhythm, which allows us to velocitize money in ways that we never could before, because now we can have 8 and then 10 and 12 and 14 and 16-hour workdays, however long we can push people for. And we can maintain that forever, regardless of the season. We're not dependent on the summer light to work longer hours. And we are decoupling in the increase like proletarianization. We're decoupling from the land, going away from what like Brian Deloria Jr. would call like a place-based temporality towards a time-based temporality. And by losing these connections with the land, by being pushed into the wage market, then we have a subject that can be turned into a machine for capital, thus feeding into the mind-body split with this sort of Cartesian mechanistic worldview, and viewing some people, the peasantry, as merely body or much closer to animal. Get into that a little bit more again in page 146 or something like that. Yeah, just this process of like we change one thing and it feeds into all of these other processes that we're changing. And it's not like there's a concerted effort over hundreds of years specifically to demonize gathering at midnight around a bonfire to have sex for the purposes of breaking the solidarity of the peasantry apart, but that it becomes a useful tool for that later, which becomes a tool itself for the proletarianization of the peasantry.
Yeah, right. James,
Yeah,
did you?
and to add to that, the value ladenness, this you could see this as Weber calls it, the reform of the body as a technology of the body of social control. But yeah, there's multiple ways of doing it. We could treat it for, kind of satisfaction for our needs, well-being, flourishing society, organizing for that, or for profit and acquisition. Because she does put natural state in quotes, because there really is no natural state. There's always some kind of technology of the body there in any group. Or if there is a natural state, we don't really know what that is.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you brought up kind of page 1246, because I have it here. Like that's when she starts talking about human body is the first machine developed by capitalism, and it's very true. It's you know, when kind of in my own kind of studies in just American government dealing with natives, population, really from Hawaii to Philippines, to Alaska, to the Midwest, to Georgia. Like one of the complaints that kind of appears over and over again is this characterization of the natives as lazy, right? Like they just keep saying like these people don't work. Of course, like there's, you know, it's beyond proof that these people like have civilizations and they're
right,
not in work, they're doing everything we do in different ways. But this idea that, okay, so labor is purposeful, right? Like and it's not all just, you know, direct, I pick, you know, whatever produce from the ground, or I go hunting, right? I mean, these people are also doing commerce, they're stockpiling, there is festivals, there's all kinds of shit. But the idea that, look, I mean, at some point you stop working, you do other things, you do life,
right,
there are other activities that need to be done, artistic, ritualistic, creating relations, also and that kind of, like you're saying, like being place specific rather than working to this eternal kind of time temporal thing out there that, you know, it's like, no, the whole point is to work. Also in that shift, there's this this relationship with the land, right? Like that you need to just kind of maximize and make it constantly work, which of course it doesn't. It corrodes, you know. Like I was reading about Mexico City's like,
oh
you know,
my God,
stunk.
aquaculture.
Yeah, I mean the city has sunk, you know, like what is it, 6 feet, like a fucking, like it keeps sinking because of this types of activities. But I mean, not to get too far off, I guess I just wanted to bring up this this idea that this very much connected to private property and keeping the land and not letting go of the land. You know, like one thing about Athabascans, like when United States senators go there, and it's like, oh, these people just leave their places, or they don't forever like keep watch over like the caribou. You know, it's like, again,
Yeah.
Mark and I were just talking about that
yeah.
the other day, and you're right. In this kind of like it does, because the native peoples around the world have been kind of managing the land in some way, maybe a more subtle way, or at least having an impact on the environment, more harmonious most of the time, but sometimes not. But when it was Locke, right, comes in and kind of makes this argument that to be like own the land, you need to kind of like transform it, like do be violent to it, really, in a way. And then I was thinking of how, like, then they, you know, just like land that needs to lie fallow for a while, let the field replenish its nutrients. People need to do that too. You know, and
Yeah,
be around a lot. Some
I
people,
think there is some. No, that's very true, because it's also true about like the urban setting. You know, not to just, you know, always for me to bring it back to kind of the native character, like the practices of kind of siestas or Sabbath, or in Iran, like just for prayer times at the mid-afternoon.
Mhm.
All these cultures are like degrading under the pressure of capitalism, because you can't have the city shut down for 2-3 hours in the
Sure.
middle of the day, which was the case when I was still living in Iran. Of course, it was changing. Coffee, right? Like this switching from tea to coffee is a huge kind of transformation right now.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then there's like millions of papers written on how that transforms even artistic work. Like some people like, you know, argue that, oh yeah, you couldn't have Shakespeare and that more mode of writing without the change in consumption of certain beverages and kinds of food. Anyway, so like you're saying, I guess I'm just going into details. Everything is changing and conforming to a certain abstract economic need that is still developing itself.
Right.
Mhm. Would this be the time when all these standards started to become universalized? The
Right.
metric system and time and watch development was growing at this clock development. Technology was from pressure from these capitalist forces, especially like transport, getting like a way to accurately judge where the ship is. The clock is necessary for that, to see where, you know, the stars are here, but you have to know the exact time in Greenwich, England.
Right.
And to have a value of like the movement to standardize weights is to very much initially to have a consistent value of a product, so that product didn't lose value in the process of being shipped to a place that had a different standard of weight. It might have been off by a small amount, or a disagreement in the conversion or whatever. You know, I mean, there's this reason why we shifted to using like these ultra secure mechanisms of weight standards, like a spheroid of platinum, because even though it's ungodly expensive, it never degrades, or it degrades so slowly that it only loses grams every century or something like that, you know.
Because
Yeah.
previously it would be the length of the king's foot in this region is the standard, and
Right.
transporting that in goods to another place, you need to kind of the meter stick is like, I think in the similar place, like in a vacuum sealed or something,
Mhm.
high security.
Yeah, I think and maybe like when well, yeah, I was also thinking about like even from like 1850s to 1950s, like not considering the of course crashes and wars and disruptions, there is this predictability in time, especially with kind of financial instruments like you're talking about. There's yeah, this loan that I take now, I know where its interest rates will be 10 years from now, right? Or where the stocks, like what is the possibility of them, because of this the oversight and control over it. But like now even like that's gone, right? I mean, you had control, you had kind of quantifying everything and putting them in a schedule and managing it. But today's capitalism, like you don't know where your dollar will be tomorrow.
Right. No,
Nobody
I mean,
can tell
this
you.
is one of those really profound ways to talk about like how primitive accumulation is still ongoing, is that primitive accumulation is not just the accumulation of goods or sort of regions or populations, but also of market space or something like that. And you know, there's this fundamental, let's take the example of something like Bitcoin, right? There's this fundamental misunderstanding about whether it could ever be used as a money. And you know, if the value of your dollar fluctuates over the course of a year, people don't trust it anymore. Like that's why we're seeing inflation in everywhere right now, is because because the capitalists can, that so long as there's an opportunity for it to sort of not run away but escalate, they will. And and so you have this kind of thing like Bitcoin that's only ever capable of being speculative because it fluctuates too much, right?
Right.
And
Even when they tether it.
Even when they tether it. And that's like it's the level of a frontier of speculation like Athabascan tar sands are for petrochemical speculations. It's like, okay, there's technically something to be extracted here, but you're really, really mining the dredges of what's left over. It's the thing that nobody wanted. That's the only reason it's left over. You know, the whole reason that capitalism was able to create such spectacular wealth, and often in non-zero sum ways, was because of its stability allowed the velocity of money to radically increase. Its instability, even though its instability is creating new markets, is develocitizing money at roughly the same rate, at a lesser rate, at a greater rate, way too close, that now like it is not capable of generating wealth in the same ways it once was. Like you've reached the end of that resource frontier.
Yeah, for the general population of it, or some of the upper classes, of course. Yeah. So yeah, I guess the part that I had highlighted here, you already read. Yeah, so now we are kind of delving into Marx, and maybe I should read this part too. You guys see page 135 in front of me, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Before you go into that, I want to comment
ahead
on your statement about laziness.
Okay.
And this is, I'm going to refer back to Shirley on this one. Shirley Geiger's notion of the ways in which we use language contain the entire question we purport to be asking ourselves in the first place. So something like, so talking about like the laziness of these populations. This is a very ongoing way of relating to non-imperial core worker subjects. And my personal experience, like working in Thailand, this was like an ongoing way in which the business owners, who were largely foreign nationals in some respect or another, would view Thai people as like lazy, but at least they're not Burmese, lazy, but at least they're not Laotian, right? There's this like nested hierarchical structure. It's very white supremacist and colonialist in its narratives. And in some straightforward way, they're not the analysis. Wait, what am I trying to say here? The assessment isn't wrong, the analysis is, or something like that. That when you compare the worker policing of an American subject to a Thai subject, you get a very different work output from them. And I would say this is a function of the capitalist using what I would judge to be an incorrect word. It is not that the Thai subject is lazy, using my own personal experience there. It's not that the Thai subject is lazy, it's that the American subject, the Western subject, is over-policed. Because we have internalized the policing to a degree where we hold personal moral value in how much we're willing to break ourselves. Like, did you spend last week digging a tunnel under Mordor with a spoon? Well, fuck you, you're not as hard of a worker as me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, to kind of domesticate it and moralized.
Right.
Yeah, James, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you got to grind, that's very common.
Right.
People to talk about the hustle and how they're flexing about working 60 hours a week.
Right.
And it
should be embarrassed about it, if anything.
Yeah, and it's not just the
Wow.
pride in yourself, but the shame, the moral disgust of others who aren't doing that.
Right.
But the thing is that even in the American discourse, I mean, that this is new as I'm finding out more and more. This kind of almost feudal kind of giving oneself to the powers of labor and capital. And like we saw that's kind of its most grotesque form at the beginning of the pandemic, when there was this idea of that politicians would go on national TV and say, it's like, look, some people have to take the fall for the rest of us, because what if this thing starts? I know this comes up all the time, but I mean,
Right.
I'm still like, there are things that I'm seeing that in today's world that, you know, up until 4 or 5 years ago, we would it was our caricature of kind of capitalist discourse about work ethics.
And yeah, and it's because, like you were saying earlier about this kind of stoppages of work and other cultures, when COVID hit and things just shut down, you could tell this is kind of capitalism thrives on that, especially modern capitalism thrives on that kind of movement and transactional exchange. And once that stops, like
Yeah.
they start to get worried and
Right.
start to not keep, well, I'm sure that they have plenty of money, but they're not making more money constantly.
But also, I mean, capital has to be in motion. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess
Yeah.
that's the end of it.
It's a shark.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not only the cessation of movement, though. It's that contemporary forms, the most contemporary forms of capitalism thrive off. I mean, just kind of just this, like Naomi Klein's notion, like the shock doctrine, right? They thrive off of shocks. Every one of those is an opportunity to not only recover some imagined loss,
Mhm.
like we're talking about, like, I'm not making as much profit as I think I ought to be, but also take more than was previously the case, right? And so we get Biden as a response to Trump, which is an objective rightward move from Obama, who was already a right centrist, right?
Yeah.
And that's called a victory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's I mean, it's so grotesque right now. I mean, it's a lot of people, you could see, for example, the baby formula shortage.
Sure.
It was impending because concentrated into two corporations,
Mhm.
with the help of the US government, by the way. I mean, official deals,
Mhm.
but also like one of these corporations was killing people, right? And the United States sanctioned them. They were like, you know what? We're just not going to produce and see how you like it, right? And so they stopped. So then there's this shortage. And then United States government has to go to these people who also produce billion other products that you have no idea, right? Just
Sure.
behind corporation, to ask them to start producing again, you know, probably foregoing some of the sanctions and requirements, which by the way came out not because of United States inspection, but as a result of a whistleblower who for years working there, I was like, look, there's certain bacteria going here that shouldn't be. But anyway, I mean, I guess I'm saying this stuff not as kind of shock value, but at this idea of the power that is politically wielded by the economic center here on what a lot of people would consider to be the most and richest, most powerful, richest empire the world's ever seen. Now imagine that power over their workers, right? As you can see, for example, right now, Amazon and Starbucks, like they just break labor laws, because they're like, hey, by the time that next year these things go to court, blah, 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 the fines that, could not bother us,
Right.
Um,
Even if the fines literally fine them for the money that they made by virtue of breaking that labor law, if it was a literal 1-for-1, both the depreciation of the value of that money,
yeah.
The appreciation of the value of saving that and earning interest and investing in whatever other way,
Yeah.
the destruction of labor solidarity, like all of these
It's
aggregate
worth it.
effects would be worth it.
Yeah.
Even if it was literally, you just, if it was the sort of like, if you're rich enough, you can pay to break the speed limit kind of notion. Even if you just viewed it that way, it'd still be worth it for them to do it. They'd literally make money off of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we shouldn't be surprised, because that is exactly what capitalism purports to be a system that does, is it aggregates benefits into profit. It aggregates small disparate things, and those like come out the other end. There's this sort of like joking meme of step 1 whatever, step 3 profit, step 2 is blank, but like that is actually the structure of capitalism, and that's its virtue, supposedly.
Very, very
Yeah,
much so.
and
Yeah.
step 2 might be immoral or unethical behaviors. There's always this kind of liberal contradiction to try to rein it in
Right.
and put laws kind of trying to bound in the drive for profit.
Right.
Which, like you're
Step
saying,
2
with
might be
Amazon, they just
arcane
figured out.
eldritch, and nobody knows what the fuck is happening there.
Well, no, there's someone does. Someone figured out, look, we can break these laws.
Right.
Don't break these. We go into step too far.
Right.
And just kind of calculate their losses and their gains.
I mean, it's we saw, Trump in one of these cases. I think this was it doesn't matter. Whatever. He wasn't turning some files to someplace. Who cares? And the court was like charging him, I don't know, $10,000 a day or whatever. He took it. It added up. He's like, I have billions and billions of dollars. Like, what do I give a shit? Like, charge me $1 million. Charge me $100 million. Like, yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too far off, but like, there's no sanctioning. Like NRA has been like bankrupt for like fucking the past decade. With the Pierre whatever under investigation, and their last head was Oliver North, a wonderful criminal himself, who by lying to Congress ended up having a History Channel show.
I can do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the crime, as you're saying, Mark, is almost more profitable, as profitable as the endeavor that produces the crime.
Yeah, we're not in a society where like law is the judgment, is the standard of judgment. Profit is the standard of what actions you should take.
Yeah, which has the moral and judicial kind of judgment already on it.
Right. And yeah, that's back to the sort of point from Shirley. Right? Shirley's original form of this, as I heard it, was like, as a kid, her mom always called her stubborn. As an adult, she got praised for how persistent she was. They're the same goddamn thing, In this case, it's the legitimate business or the crime, which one's more profitable. That's just appending the moral judgment into the question, baking the moral judgment into the question, because they both ought to be crimes in the sense of like what, not the legal framework of criminality, but what people morally ethically mean by crime, as in, have you taken from someone in an unjust manner? Like, the legal business is itself extractive and exploitative, right? And so, I mean, of course the crime's more profitable. It's just the legal business practice carried to the place where it used to be before that place became formally illegal, right? Like, most of the laws that we have that rein in business practices are the result of, probably all of them, but most just to be safe, are the result of specific ways to stop a business from doing something they were doing. Like the antitrust legislation we have is a direct result of trying to rein in Standard Oil, because there were no laws that made what they did illegal. So a law was made to make them illegal, right?
Yeah. It was immediately clear that, I mean, the Sherman Act and these things, right, they're 100 years old. Like, if we practice this, there's not going to be a country, right? I mean, it's like these people will destroy everything.
Yeah, the plan is to just to let the most powerful people just try stuff, and then, oh, if you did something really bad, we won't let you do that again. But keep trying to do other terrible things.
Yeah,
to get more money, to make yourself even more powerful and wealthy.
Yeah, which
no other society was like that. There wasn't like, maybe the king could get away with things, but it wasn't like just go on and do whatever. Then we'll find out after the knights start murdering people. Okay, don't do that.
Right. Actually, possibly more sanctions in the feudal system.
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess this is all, I mean, what we're describing are kind of different modalities of extracting this labor power. And I kind of wanted to read this part that I underlined here, and maybe the next section too. Since Marx do see alienation from the body as distinguishing trait of capitalist work relation. By transfer, every time I start talking about Marx, Mark just like fucking runs out the room. I'm just waiting.
No, I mean, this is, I too see the alienation from the body as a distinguishing trait of capitalist work relation. And that's why I need to go get water.
No, I'm just joking. By transforming labor into commodity, capitalism causes workers to submit their activity to an external order which they have no control, which they cannot identify. Yeah, just kind of the immediate and simple what she's saying. If you read Capital, Grundrisse, like all these works, there's ideas that Marx sees. There's this thing inside you. There's this unease. There's this power, conatus, whatever you want to call it. It has appeared in philosophy in many forms, and this is what kind of makes you an active being, a species, being in the world that can change the world as it conceptualizes it, and vice versa, conceptualize and change the world accordingly. And what capitalism is the harness, right? Capitalism is not the alienation of labor, right? Labor is an activity. It's the alienation of labor power, right? It's that thing that we quantify with time, right? You go to work, 8 hours of work, and that turns to surplus value and stuff, which we'll talk about later. But that's what she's talking about. I just thought I should go over that.
Yeah, and capitalism in a way is like one of the most ruthless ways of exploiting that conatus, that drive, that human kind of motivation to do things.
Yeah.
And from all angles, and even now we're seeing it more in physical, but now like in more modern age with more kind of intellectual labor.
Yeah. And what you're saying, of course, even in Wealth of Nations, you have Adam Smith and kind of these prophets of mercantilism and capitalism talk about, because it puts labor power in this kind of uniform, monotonous, and ultimately alienating sphere, right? You're making someone else rich. You never see what the fuck you produced. You're not in charge of his price. You're not in charge of anything around it, even the most unionized of shops. And where alienation comes from, and the word is from Feuerbach, who was kind of one of the fathers of sociology, and he wrote about religion from a secular perspective of alienation, is that this thing that humanity does, you create these cultures based on the natural world, and then they confront you, think of like an idol or something. Of course, Freud talks about this later too. So that's Marx kind of transformed that through Hegelian movements into your everyday life, right? That like your work under capitalism is something that confronts you as something alien, even though you're a part of it. And there's a dialectic there, of course. And she says, thus the labor process becomes the ground of self estrangement. The worker only feels himself outside his work, and his work feels outside himself. He's at home when he's not working, and he's working when he's not at home. Furthermore, with the development of the capitalist economy, the worker becomes only formally the free owner of his labor, which, unlike the slave, he can replace at the disposal of the buyer for a limited period of time. This implies that he must constantly look upon his labor power, his energies, his faculties as his own property, his own commodity. So then there's another layer here. So you have this your work that confronts you, but you also have to externalize your work power, right? Your talents.
You have to brand yourself.
You have to brand yourself. You go on a fucking LinkedIn website and you list them, quantify them, how much and how intensely you can do X, Y, and Z, and you sell those to the highest bidder for a very low price, of course. So that's kind of what she's on about here. This dissociation with the body. So she's kind of going through all these movements, but centering on the body. There are examples here. I don't know if y'all wanted to touch on someone with Milton and all these kind of aesthetic movements during this time, where people are kind of cast out of the Eden type of conversations.
I suppose this portion often makes me think of this notion of European indigeneity, talking about people like John Trudell I'm very open to critiques of notions of European indigeneity because it has its limitations. But I think in this kind of a place that it's like it's helpful to recognize that like John Trudell was a indigenous, I think he referred to himself as Indian, but an indigenous American who talked about the continuity of resistance against colonialist capitalist order, talking about how long indigenous Americans have been fighting this, how Africans have been fighting it for even longer, and Europeans have been fighting it for even longer. And in that kind of a resituation, we can view like European indigeneity as a battered form of a submitted form of indigeneity or something like that. That these, when she's talking on page 136, a long process would be required to produce a disciplined workforce in the 16th and 17th century, as the hatred for wage labor was so intense that many proletarians preferred to risk the gallows rather than submit to the new conditions of work. This is a several hundred years into this process, and you still have people who are risking their life by not working because of the bloody laws, the poor laws, the rosters, the like vagabond rosters, these kinds of things. And then when you back to the question about like lazy or over disciplined, or do you have a work ethic or are you over disciplined? Like, I think this is the state in which we can say that workers from the West, or from the imperial core, are over disciplined. That like we have submitted to this fear on a social level. We've submitted to it so profoundly that we no longer question it at all. We consider it our normal form of labor. is to work ourselves almost to pieces.
Yeah, and I think she also refers to that as the true regime of terror here. And I think that the benefit of what you're saying is that, and what you've written here is that, that this development, I mean, no development in history is natural, right? I mean, it is based on human intervention, and here you needed kind of
Right.
exertion of power to make domicile and domestic these great kind of upheavals, specifically against wage labor.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so here on page 137, what did I say? To regards to, I wrote here, the body, especially in a social consolidated form, becomes the enemy. The body was also a great source of wealth. And I think we pretty much talked about that here. She wants to talk about some of the representations of these in art form and philosophy. Maybe I'll read this part on page 138. In this, Hobbes and Descartes were representative of their time. The care they display in exploring the details of corporeal and psychological reality reappears in the Puritan analysis of inclinations and individual talents, which was beginning of bourgeois psychology. What were you saying?
To go back real
Please,
quick,
yeah.
The page
Yeah.
before, she's saying that the body is so important because there's both like a fear of it, its kind of physicality and brute animalisticness, and
Yeah.
especially together in riots or social disorders, which they probably assumed would have no organization because it's the mob, and also because it is the source of wealth. So it's hated or feared, and also cherished and desired and needed.
Right.
So this focus was on the body in this period.
Yeah, and it's also feared, but it's also a source of wealth because you need to extract the labor power out of it. But I forgot.
One of my critiques on that notion is that I think there's an opportunity there to recognize that that framework applied to this social body is the dominant narrative that becomes applied to the feminine gender. Like, this is functionally the same thing. It's the fear and the need together. It's the desire, but the like all of the frameworks of like the virgin whore dichotomies, all of the women are the temptress, but they're also pure and we need them, and like all of these kinds of structures operate on functionally the same level. And specifically, since she's talking about this coming out of the witch hunts and the ways in which the witch hunts were highly gendered violence, I think that's a thing that's kind of lacking from this area.
Wait, repeat that last part. What are you lacking? You said
just a clear a clear genealogy of where this comes from, or if not a genealogy, where it leads to, because functionally it's the same thing. It's coming out of a fear of women, turning into a fear of women through it's like just like the state prefigures itself through these sort of processes of discipline, that femininity prefigures itself through this dialectic with the social body, or with the body of the worker. Sort of like
Yeah, I think she kind of focuses because she kind of wants to elaborate on the mechanism of Hobbesian and then Cartesian duality. Some of that's lost, but I was wondering if the move is done elsewhere.
I think it exists as in this idea for me comes out of this book. I think it
Yeah.
exists across the book in its entirety. But I think this is one of those places where it is needed in an especially concise and clear form. That's the limitation of my critique on it. That's all.
Yeah, there is a form of it in Freud, of course, but for Freud is mainly psychological and developmental, but
Sure.
it's the I mean for both male and daughter child, you know, the first time they confront their parents' genitals, right? I mean, the boys, the girl more so than the boy, the girl sees the lack of penis on the mother and sees castration, and then equates her social position in the world as a result of that castration, you know, and then realizing that, oh, she's also castrated, but that, you know, leads to kind of gravitation towards the father and the fatherly body. But for the boy, there is that horror of castration, but realizing that he has a penis. But there is the kind of the possibility of that castration if certain impulses are acted on. Of course, for Freud, the main one would be incest. But yeah, like how does the psychoanalysis aside, like how does that unfolds in history? And I think that the part of this has to do with that aspect of discipline and the associations with discipline, right? I mean, for example, some of the feminization of the work are again, I refer to Yanis Varoufakis. He was like in liberal democracy in Greece, for example, you see the proliferation of feminine rules in the judiciary, right? And at the same time, you see the devaluation of judiciary, especially from the right perspective. Also, you have this happening in America in the medical process, the labors, right? You have the increasingly feminization of nurses and doctors, and in the education system, teachers, right, professors, and then you immediately see their evaluation. While 50 years ago, if you were from fucking Harvard, you were good enough to work at it, you know, in the presidential office, right? But now, like, if you're an academic, you're horrible. If you're a teacher, you're awful. If you're a nurse or a doctor, you're part of a conspiracy or whatnot. So I think it's simultaneous. You know, like there is you know, there is the capitalist kind of division of labor that, you know, because of the enormous wealth that it requires, it goes towards equity of some sort, as in like everybody can get anywhere in these kind of wage labor system. But then there is disciplines that are both inflicted and then culturally, I think, just unfold, as in, oh, there's this woman subject in this field, and then it's devalued. But of course, what I'm referring to doesn't answer your question, because you're thinking about why did it take place in the 16th, 17th century, right? I mean, what I'm talking about is just happened like post World War II.
Sure.
But I wonder if there is anything to gain from that. Or not.
I mean, I think there's something about there's something about dialectics, and I am not knowledgeable enough to say it doesn't exist in anyone that is a dialectical thinker, this kind of framework on it. I suspect it probably does. It's kind of, I guess, an American pragmatist take on it, would be that like these shifts happen when enough mass or momentum or inertia accrues from accrues into a question. When a question becomes big enough, and you know, at this point we're talking about querelle de femme, the question of the women, right? That we have the notion of the question of women, just like now we have the notion of the question of the transes, because there's enough you know, third estate power pushing it, or right-wing agenda behind it, or evangelical Christianity behind it, or whatever. It's sort of like puffing up the question. And so I suspect that at this point we have the legacy of the witch hunts creating a femininity that can be applied to workers, regardless, to not even to an individual worker, to like a theoretical worker. And then once it can become a fixed notion of what it is to be a worker, then that can uphold femininity itself. So it creates it prefigures itself, it creates itself.
Yeah, but I guess I was under the impression that the whole point of the development and of especially last chapter going into wage labor was a departure from femininity and its modalities of how it work and towards epistemology, and of course all that relates to social relations and what sort of power.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that the
yeah.
theoretical worker is in a subaltern relationship to society. Like the
Yeah.
worker is a reproducer of society. They are not a producer of society. They are not a knowledge producer. They're not an autonomous or agentive subject,
Yeah.
right? And so in that way, like there is a similarity between the worker's role, the woman's role, the, you know, there's the sort of you know, not the same but it rhymes kind of thing going on between all subaltern states.
Sure. Yeah, in that sense I do see that. Yeah, of course.
And I think that's created in precisely by borrowing off of, in this moment, not saying that not trying to make some historical argument of sexism is the original oppression. I think those are useless arguments. In this historical moment, this notion of what it is to be a worker borrows from what was done to de-autonomize and de-agentify women in the witch hunts. By pushing those same the same calculations onto this very theoretical worker that gets read as, you know, in a contemporary moment, we would read the worker is like a cis man who's white and whatever, right? However many ways you can describe a person without describing them at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, well, James, I don't know if you have anything.
No, I think Mark said it pretty well. I don't know. I'll have to let that digest.
Yeah, I mean, maybe for reading this, he comes. I mean, the only thing I can think of is no, I don't. Yeah, I don't want to make that analogy. Okay. Yeah. Um, I don't, I don't really want to talk about the Leviathan and Descartes here. I mean, I understand the purpose of it here in this text, and we can talk about some sort, some kind of general philosophical moves, but I think it's first to say, not, we don't want to get into the weeds of that, but I have a couple of lines selected in 139 and 140. Of course, if you want to bring some back, I'll read this part from my notes, then from 139 here. It says the body becomes mechanical, but it lacks experience. This is different than the medieval degradation of the body. We're thinking about a need to discipline and extract. Body becomes a tool. Telos is external to itself. Yeah, I guess we've talked about alienation already. This is kind of a different version of it.
Right.
Yeah, let's in 140 I wrote here, Hobbes declares that the heart is but a spring, and the join so many wheels we perceive in this war as a bourgeois spirit, whereby not only is the work the conditioner and motive of existence of body, but the need it felt to transform all bodily power into work power. And I think this is kind of the cyborg discussion, but it's happening kind of very early on, where the mechanisms of the body are comporting to its social utility here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just any kind of other use of the body is attacked, like we were talking about laziness earlier, and even imagination, looking at some of the footnotes for 16, all to kind of refine the body to be a machine for labor.
Yeah, I think the most grotesque form of it, of course, now was, I mean, we talk about this all the time, but like how kind of like a slave body like becomes, which is not a slave body. It's a body that comes with leisure, but is purported to be kind of the ideal body, and a working body, a powerful body, is a sculpted body today. And I think that we just had a discussion of this with Jordan Peterson having a meltdown about a swimsuit edition, like a woman who was he expressed it as like a tyrannical, like a propaganda to have her on, because he was diluting some eternal form of beauty, which is of course it's ridiculous, especially for someone who purports to be so interested in history.
Right.
But yeah, certain bodies are kind of considered as I mean, she's in this book, she's talking about how body is seen as something inert and sterile, mm-hmm. that it needs to be kind of animated, but I think today that's of course very true.
Yeah, and I did want to talk about how she describes Descartes and Hobbes. They're two different styles. Like Descartes putting the self-management style, the mind being the kind of conductor of the body. But I keep thinking about how Descartes used to just lay in bed till like the afternoon, reading and writing. And Hobbes is much more of a social kind of, you might play mechanizing the body, and also.
Yeah, and in the Hobbes is specific writing, of course, in the most kind of tumultuous periods in European history, where like there's like just what she's talked about in the previous chapters, like there is civil wars and there's peasant uprising and there's everything. So you can also see that, yeah, there is kind of the bourgeois desire for it, but then there is this desire for order that kind of appears in his work.
With Hobbes especially, he's atheist, but at the same time creating this are wanting this total order in the state.
Right.
I think.
It's a very
Yeah.
secularization of God for sure. Yeah, when we get back to 148, I have, or when we get to 148, I have a bit to add on that, but
Yeah,
I don't want
okay,
to jump ahead
let's-
yet, so I'll wait until we get there.
Yeah, let's mark that. Yeah, then you have on 140, the last thing I want to say here is that nature needs to be controlled, sensations need to be subdued. The spirit must rule the body or kill it for the extraction of labor power. And this spirit, of course, is not kind of the soul. The spirit is kind of like the purpose of it that lives outside the body.
Right.
The spirit of capitalism, if you will, if you're thinking about the Weberian terms, which is an ideology.
One of the things I appreciate Federici for quite a lot is that Federici does something that's, you know, not the rarest thing in the world, but not common, where she's very willing to say, like, here's my argument. If that doesn't work, here's another argument. If that doesn't work, here's another argument. I'll throw 12 at him, and like, you can just take whichever one you want. I don't really care.
Yeah, right.
And my favorite version of the arguments we just went through is at the bottom of 141. That's this is how we must read the attack against witchcraft and against magical view the world, which, despite the efforts of the church, had continued to prevail on a popular level throughout the Middle Ages. At the basis of magic was an animistic conception of nature that did not admit any separation between matter and spirit, and thus imagined the cosmos as a living organism populated by occult forces, where every element was in sympathetic relation with the rest. In this perspective, where nature was viewed as a universe of signs and signatures, marking invisible affinities that had to be deciphered, every element, herbs, plants, metals, and most of all the human body hid virtues and powers peculiar to them. Thus, a variety of practices were designed to appropriate this secrets of nature and bend its powers to the human will, from palmistry to divination, from the use of charms to sympathetic healing. Magic opened a vast number of possibilities. There was a magic designed to win card games, to play unknown instruments, to become invisible, to win somebody's love, to gain immunity in war, to make children sleep. And this is sort of the other part of this Hobbesian notion of reducing the body to a machine, is that what did you reduce it? That's what it got reduced to. This is what it got reduced from. It got reduced from something that lived. You know, Christianity stopped being the religion. This is to sort of utilize Lynn White Jr.'s framework, but stopped being the religion whereby someone spoke to a bush that burned and didn't consume itself, right? That's a very like mystical experience of Christianity, wherein fire itself is alive, and it turned into a religion that is materialist, that has the Cartesian split of material, of dead material and living spirit, right? All material is dead, all spirit is alive.
Yeah, it's transformation. Yeah, I mean, definitely Christianity starts very corporeal. Yeah, and you know how I kind of worded that was like, you know, magic kills industry, and she says yes, bodies, you know, in a sense, is for appropriation of power, not only labor power, but to animate it to I mean, it's the same thing, to animate it to work to A, B, C, and D, change the world. But magic is magic. In magic, the body obtains power. It has this kind of its primary use is to interact and create forms of power. And what does that mean? For example, you have again going to the witch, right, and rituals and creating, be it cures or results or foreseeability, so the body's not inert, right? If anything, you like bleed it out or you take hair from it, even when it's dead, to conjure some sort of movement. And you don't need work for this. It's based on knowledge, not that you don't need to exert effort into obtaining that end.
But on that, it's not a labor power in that kind of socially media
yeah,
sense. And also magic in the further sense also kind of rejects the capitalists want to put on the idea there's a scarcity that of all of these goods, and there's a way to get them is to go through us to get money, where magic, even the idea of is that like, well, I could just make loaves of bread and fish appear if I had the right kind of power.
Yeah, which is actually like the financial sector. It's the banking sector. You know, I mean, they retain that because first of all, you dress up well, you do things where you don't labor. Labor is degrading, right? You create things out of nothing, right? You go to a bank and get a loan. There's not like they don't get on the telephone. It's like, oh, okay, so I gave this person $5,000. I need you to transfer, this much material stuff from this bank in Shanghai to this bank in Morocco. No, it's in conjuring of values based on certain principles. And those principles, as it happens, are unbounded. Not to get too deep in that, I just want to say that certain classes retain certain elements of those.
No, I think that's very important to like these. This is something that John Dewey talks about in comparing art, saying art is the continuity of magic and science is the continuity of religion.
Yeah.
And that there is fundamentally,
I love those lectures, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, very much. There's something fundamentally irreproducible about magic, that it's defined by its irreproducibility such that it creates heroes or prophets or messiahs, but also that that if you tried to like write it down as a spell that anybody could do, you would evacuate it of its meaning. That magic must be chaotic at some level. It must be like wrangling. You must like tap in. Even the most proficient magic user should not be able to consistently summon their will from the universe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that must die. And that's exactly the way in which art has a continuity with magic, is that like you could even repaint. There's a semi-famous anecdote about a Japanese jazz band who like perfectly copied a jazz improv session and then reached out to get help learning how to play jazz, and the person says like, play me something, and they play it, and he's like, that's fantastic, play me something again, and they play the same thing, and they're like, okay, but like that's sort of missing the, who knows if it's a true story or whatever, but
sure, yeah,
that's sort of like missing the actual heart of jazz, which is the improvisational character, not sounding improvisational, right?
Right. Yeah.
Science
right.
always tries to sound magical, but be reproducible.
Right.
And that's, and industry and all, and most of the sectors.
Innovation.
It's this notion of like, we can control the outcome, that you can choose the outcome, not choose the action. And magic says you can choose the action, but not the outcome.
Right. Yeah. Like one thing you said early on, I think really resonated, and I was thinking about kind of development of American criminal law in Alaska and in Southeast tribes, of course, like like medicine men and women, like you can call these witches. There was this a practice of it was a contract, like when you put your loved one in the hands of a medicine man to cure them, if they failed, there was a possibility that the medicine man would have to die. And this came in the contract, like it was based on it, and the conjuring of that power dust was like it was consequential, and it was very much based on on both sides, variety of elements. If this medicine man could carry this process, and in a sense, whatever your value judgment of that is, that the process does obtain power, but it's also chaotic, and is not predictable, which shows in the social interactions with it. The fact that there is a contract of if then shows that the endpoint is not determinative.
Right.
But we don't expect the same in our current medical systems, even though we kill a lot of people through malpractice.
Right. We're just not listening.
Which I would say is part of malpractice, but it's not, of course, not considered.
That's not the legislated part of it, but
yeah.
Sure.
In grad school, I went to a talk about, I forget who it was, but the person was arguing that shamanism was kind of a primitive form of financial speculation or insurance. And I think what we're saying is it goes the other way, that modern day finance is a kind of advanced form of magic. But at the same time, when the shaman messes up, it doesn't collapse the economic system. These kind of individual things, that the consequences are kind of pushed out to externalities and affect other people rather than the people who make the mistakes or cause the problems.
A lot less social harm in the shaman fucking up.
Yeah.
Also, you could kill that person.
You get another one.
Yeah.
Not to say, I mean, maybe you should touch this, but you could also kill these other people nowadays. I'm not saying to do that, but someone could.
Sure.
But someone would just take their place, or their software would be doing these trades.
In the Western fantasy fiction sort of landscape, it's quite filled with stories of spell plagues and sorts of the wizard who summoned the great chthonic evil or whatever, and I don't know how unique that is to Western fantasy fiction, but it definitely seems to be a very pervasive part of our storytelling. Which is a very, very Bernie Madoff kind of wizard happening here. Summons a spell to levitate a city and accidentally breaks magic for the universe or whatever.
Right. There is this. This is a very Lacanian kind of queer theory book called No Future, and in that he describes, and I'm recalling this, I read this a long time ago. He's talking about, he's like, all these Disney cartoons, you see these wizards or these older people that are trying to compel these kids to fucking grow up, be it in Little Mermaid, be it Merlin, be it in Peter Pan, especially, you have to come into adulthood, you have to leave this previous, and then the whole conflict of the story is about the kids wanting to stay infantile and impulsive by any very traditional manners and not make that passage. But of course, in No Future, his argument is that is, of course, a symptom of our society. and this kind of fight against the development and growth based on learning from the past. Yeah.
To expand on that, you could even look at sitcoms. Half of them are about this man-child who doesn't want to grow up, and his wife has to take on all this emotional labor to take care of him. It's very present in media.
Yeah.
In sort of
Queens,
reality
there you go,
TV
there's
shows,
one.
thinking about these sort of like the dating reality TV genre, where it's the, you know, find your true love in 48 hours, whatever, through this special method, and then you know, within 48 hours these people are like pledging to like leave all their friends behind, and you know, and join the monogamous monastery that is this very like strange notion of marriage, and you know, like, stop having fun, you know, I know I'm gonna have to leave all this behind, kind of stuff.
Yeah. So bizarre.
It is bizarre.
Yeah. Okay, so going into 143, we have here the mechanization of the bodies is so constituted of the individual that, at least in the industrialized countries, giving space to the belief in occult forces does not jeopardize the regularity of the social behavior. Astrology too can be allowed to return with the certainty that even the most devoted consumers of astral charts will automatically consult the watch before going to work. This is wonderful.
Yeah, I thought of even like panpsychism being very popular now. The idea that the matter can think, or the body can think.
Yeah, and all those books, like their last chapters, like how to increase productivity through like fucking menstrual magic or something.
The
how to get wealthy, or
I read this,
you know, or even the ones that more express like a heartfelt yearning of like how to find the love of your life. Maybe don't work yourself to death, so that you can like create or be part of a community and find people you actually share something in common with, you know.
Right.
Like sometimes our answers are just materialist in that way, quite often, I think, you know.
No, you got to get a better car and a nicer house, then you'll find your true love.
There was in Gorbachev's is a biography. It's talking about, you know, his wife is a forgot her name, very accomplished sociologist, you know, in USSR, and they have to trek it over here. And when they come over here, you know, the wife are especially under Reagan, are put in the wives' room, and of course Nancy's like hella into astrology and stuff. Like, she's just incredibly ignorant and kind of blind to the world person in the most kind of stereotypical type. But I think what like kind of freaks out the Gorbachevs here is that she's giving advice to Reagan on political and domestic and foreign matters based on astrology. And then you have like the advisor to the Middle East, who's Jerry Falwell, who is also, all his kind of knowledge comes from, you know, a kind of a let's say a Christian shamanistic reading of the
Crusader
Bible
historian.
Yeah, pretty much. But you know, in the most kind of the Southern Virginia type of way.
Right.
But it's, I guess, but it's not shamanistic, is it? Because they're all like very conformative to American imperialist vision of the world. They're just
even Jerry Falwell, Christianity is his side hustle.
Of course,
it's not his real job.
No, the main job is very political.
Political figure or cult leader, or however you want to frame it, whatever. I'm not trying to append moral value to the name.
Sure.
Just like to be a public luminary. That's his real job.
Influencer.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much an
Instagram
influencer.
influencer.
I mean, the silent majority and all that shit, right?
Yeah.
Which comes before Reagan, but yeah. So it's I really like that line. It resonated with me. And she's then in discussion of prophecies, and when I was reading that, I was like, I wish I had read this in grad school because that would have been useful. She says here, prophecies are not simply expressions of fatalistic resignation. Historically, they've been a means by which the poor have externalized their desire, given legitimacy to their plans, and have been spurred to action. Hobbes recognized this when he warned that there's nothing that so well directs men in their deliberations as the foresight of the sequels of their actions. Prophecy being many times the principal cause of events foretold. And of course, the immediate example comes to my mind is Christianity as in the Gospels earlier, maybe not John, but it is kind of the expression of the poor about certain desires.
Yeah, and there's a lot of examples. I can't name that many, but even Revelations or Nostradamus has been considered this by some people, some interpretations. I think it's interesting how it's now most people would see them as depoliticized completely, and whether they believe them as real prophecies or not, that's the interesting part to them. Not being
or politicized
secret critique of the political system at the time.
But even like socialism before Marx, I think a lot of what kind of predictive interpretation people do on Marx is actually like the French socialists that he was reading were very much utopian and about foreseeing stuff. And a lot of Christians within that.
And Thomas More himself, utopia and science fiction growing or kind of from out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I mean, here she's talking about this kind of change from foreseeing about at a time where he has kind of expresses desires of liberation and strategizing towards that, or just desiring it without strategy. But now it's about productivity.
Yeah, but the prophecy is more in this magical sense. Like if we believe it enough, it will come to pass, and the capitalists want to, like she says, rationalize space and time, make it more controlled. Like we were saying, the distinction between the shaman and the financial speculator, a more controlled kind of understanding of prophecy. It's growth. It's the line on the chart going up and up. On how much we're going to make the next fiscal quarter.
But no liberation, right? I mean, there is no post-capitalism in the financial sector. It's just like, I hope there is more capitalism.
Well, I mean,
here's our prophecy.
Capitalism is always like socialism for the wealthy and capitalism for the poor. So in that way,
which has already arrived for them, by the way.
Right. And so their prefigurative prophecy is how to maintain that in the future, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I think that I'm not sure if Hobbes sees this or it seems odd that he wouldn't because of his real world scenario. But the other thing that prophecy does, and it doesn't have to be prophecy, but it usually comes in that form, and like Revelations is a prime example of it, is that prophecy is often a coded language set to be able to talk about things that if you said out loud would lose your head over.
Yeah, it's the current events, actually.
Right. They are always current events, right? The many-headed beast is Nero. It's just like Christian numerology or whatever is the 666 kind of notion. This line reminds me always of the mythologies of the Western mythologies of the dragon as the one who sits on the hoard of gold, and there's a very common sense way to think about what do they do with all that gold? I don't know. They must eat it, right?
Right.
The dragon is just the illegitimate sovereign,
right.
And every characteristic they have are all of the characteristics of brutality towards the peasantry. Right.
Mhm.
So, I mean,
Yeah, and Marx talks about dragons, right, as hoarders of wealth rather than freeing it to kind of circulate in the economy.
right. And Marx certainly understood this, like with his use of vampirism and dragons and a number of other mythological characters, specifically to talk about like these as analogies for capital.
And also to, you know, make it more, I don't know, more interesting and relatable, because he's writing not for academics
Sure.
only, also for
Yeah,
the average person who might at this time be really kind of believing or be interested in these kind of tales.
Yeah, so, and then we have here, maybe I should read this part too, but regardless of the dangers with magic posed, the bourgeois had to combat its powers because it undermined the principle of individual responsibility, as magic placed the determinants of social action in the realm of the stars, out of the reach and control. Thus, in rationalization of space and time that characterized the philosophical speculation of 16th and 17th centuries, prophecy was replaced with the calculation of probabilities, whose advantage, from the capitalist viewpoint, is that here the future can be anticipated only insofar as the regularity and immutability of the system is assumed. That is, only insofar as it is assumed that the future will be like the past, and no major change, no revolution, will upset the coordinates of the individual decision making. Similarly, the bourgeois had to combat the assumption that it's possible to be in two places at the same time. For the fixation of body in space and time, that is the individual spatial temporal identification, is an essential condition of the regularity of the work process.
Yeah.
So yeah, not only predictability of the future, which is highly reliant on, it comes with making the common denominators now, like making them stick.
Right.
And calculation of probabilities was like one of the biggest things at the time. All the Pascal, Boyle, Boole, like all the mathematicians, thinkers at the time were working on this.
Probabilities, yeah.
Right.
And it all came from, you know, the story is usually like, well, there are a lot of dice games and they developed this, but, you know, from Federici's perspective, it's being developed as kind of as in its use for capitalist.
The interest in consumption of the work outside of academia comes from what Federici is talking about. And the inside of academia, it probably is what the historical narrative is. And that's sort of like the issue with the ivory tower framework, is that that you can create a devastating weapon just because you're curiously plumbing the depths of a particular branch of mathematics. So, you know, and back to the prior point about the stockbroker as a modern day financial shaman, is that they can be in two places at once, right? They're everywhere at once, especially with like split second trades, and you know, like that's a spell waiting for a trigger, and they're trading in multiple markets around the world, and you know, so like there's always the exceptional state. It's just, you know, the process of capitalization is the process of taking that away from the peasantry entirely, giving it only to the people who, you know, maybe it's like the like in the framework of the empires of the time, it's the monopoly privilege, right? In the framework of now, it's the license to trade on the market, right? Or whatever. It's like taking that state of exception and putting it in the hands of the state, instead of it being a countervailing force to the state.
Well, even the worker, I'm thinking about workers being kind of put in two places at once, but not in the same way. That, like, I'm thinking of, I think it's called Better Health. It's like a kind of gig for therapists, and you can kind of just go on an app and talk to them, and they're all different times of the night, and they have to be there for you. So I think this, and it's happening too. There's an app for translation. There's all kinds of apps like this that
Right.
is taking people away from that fixedness in their location.
Right.
I think partly because, you know, modern capitalism is less, after like post-Fordist capitalism, less reliant on a physical worker being in a building,
Right.
especially post-COVID capitalism.
Right. I'll be right back.
Okay. James, I didn't have anything to say about 146, 140, 145, 146, but I was going to move to, I don't know if you had anything. I guess maybe, I think Mark had something about 146. So we'll come to that. We can talk about, maybe I'll read this part on top of 148. But if the body is a machine, one problem immediately emerges: how to make it work. Two different modes of body government derives from theories of mechanical philosophy. On one side, you have the Cartesian model that, starting from the assumption of purely mechanical body, postulates the possibility of development in the individual mechanisms of self-discipline, self-management, self-regulation, allowing for voluntary work relations and government based on consent. On the other side, there is the Hobbesian model that, denying the possibility of a body-free reason, externalizes the functional command and signing it to the absolute authority of the state. So we'll go to body mechanization when Mark comes back, but yeah, so this is very interesting, because there is the kind of discipline that maybe Foucault talks about, eternalization of discipline, that is in the Cartesian model, where the body kind of submits itself to regularities and needed discipline, and the Hobbesian model of externalized discipline through police powers of the state, of course. Mark, we kind of skipped over 146, but I know you wanted to talk about something there, right?
No, we're good.
We're
It's
good.
already been
Okay.
talked about before. We can go to 148.
Okay, yeah, but human body as it's becoming a machine. And so, yeah, so then there's these two principles, and then I have signed, highlighted here. In being discovered, divorced from its body, the rational self certainly lost its solidarity with its corporeal reality and with nature. Its solitude, however, was to be that of a king. In the Cartesian model of the person, there is no egalitarian dualism between the thinking head and the body machine, only a master-slave relation, since the primary task of the will is to dominate the body and the natural world. So yeah, these conceptions of the self and self-domination are also reflected on the outside with the Hobbesian model of disciplining the worker. Like you raise interest rates, right? You make people having to work. I mean, that's where it says. You don't, in the time of pandemic, you don't give them relief. These are, of course, famously, Alan Greenspan articulated these sentiments, but they're nothing new. They've been around.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, well,
Please.
Skip that part, but fuck Descartes for vivisecting animals. Just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah, you know, if you don't go to work one day, there's no one's gonna, cops aren't gonna come to your house. Eventually, someone's gonna come take your house if it's not completely paid for.
Yeah.
But it's more, the coercion is more, you know, the threat of poverty, starvation, having no place to live, and
Yeah.
you know, see, and this is kind of very visible to those of us who live in a city, this kind of threat always there, like this could be
Right.
you if you don't conform and
And
do
it's
what you're
the
supposed
threat
to.
of the threat that's the most potent part of it.
Mhm.
It's the threat of the fact that like most of us don't know what the reality of being hungry or houseless actually looks like. And so, and we have been, and it has been made into a specter. So, you know, we are afraid of becoming this thing that we imagine to be, you know, if it was as we imagine it to be, we wouldn't see houseless people. They'd all just be, we'd see dead bodies on the street, you know.
Yeah.
But I think we do have this kind of Cartesian model at play in the modern world, contemporary world, and the Hobbesian model. There's definitely police state, but also a kind of carrot that if you do work and participate, you can buy shiny things and new phones and other stuff you don't need.
Yeah, I
Right.
think that one of the threats of the threat is also like excommunication, because if you don't have money, you can't do
Yeah,
things with
where are you
other
going to go?
people.
The library?
Yeah, right. It's like, hey guys, meet you there on Friday night, right? I mean, um,
Yeah, I mean, this
yeah,
is even in, you know, when I was younger, we would go like find some money to get beers and then go to the library, or I mean, not the library, but the cemetery or a park or something and drink there.
sure,
But as you get older, oh, let's go to the bar, and we'll go to the bar and you have it's more expensive there, definitely. They don't
sure.
take change as often.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Nickels.
but also you'll be, you know, you won't be like, you would have to, you know, to be part of the conversations, you need to know what the culture is. The only
Right.
way to consume culture is to, you know, have subscriptions to it,
Mhm.
be able to, I guess, yeah, what I'm saying is like that threat is like, yeah, part of it is like you're gonna die, and the other part of it is like you're gonna be alone. But if you do work and you produce those things, yeah, you get to buy your house and pay your mortgage and stuff, maybe if you don't get
Maybe.
sick.
Right.
Subscribe
But
to Netflix.
but that sociability promise might never materialize. I mean, of course, you know, your definition is just like fucking the hottest person available or something. Uh, uh, there's no guarantee that you'll be part of the society if you do perform, because the society has been deconstructed already
Sure.
through those processes.
I think also in the threat of the excommunication is you know, we all have here and probably experienced some form of it being more difficult to make new friends as we get older.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of that's, you know, interactional vector problems. Um, but you know, thinking about that in the understanding your culture form instead of like how to make friends is, it's the bootstrapping problem of this. If you are removed and have to live in your car, the amount of work that you have to go through just to get back to the state you were at before you were evicted is itself daunting enough, and probably more labor than you would save by like not going to work today or something like that.
Yeah.
And so there's this like detente problem of you will sink so low that in order to even re-begin the Sisyphean task of pushing the boulder, you'll have to like, you know, scale a vertical cliff face.
Yeah, that's the Terry Pratchett's theory of boots, that you would want to buy a really nice expensive pair of boots that will last you for years, but if you're poor, you have to buy the cheapest boots that fall apart. You have to buy another pair in a few months, and then
Right.
you're going to buy these pairs and end up spending more
Right.
money. Or if you're a renter, you're familiar with this too.
Yeah, right.
In the page 148, we don't need to go back to it, but there's thinker Robert Brandom who talks about Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, and he talks about asymmetric cognitive relations, says they're not the right way to think and act in the world. They sort of fundamentally disable our ability to move forward. We put the hierarchy before the question of what the hierarchy should look like, and we aren't able to discharge the hierarchies when they're no longer functional to us, or sort of willingly, like we're not able to act in a consensual model at all. And this, I think, goes at every level of Cartesian dualism and its other forms, sort of Manichaeanism or whatever, all the sort of dualistic worldviews that we can possibly think our way through, that they all set us up in a way to be unable to understand the world and simultaneously unable to understand our misunderstanding.
Right.
So I think, like, to be able to demonstrate the brutality of animals was essential for Descartes, because he was convinced that here he could find the answer to his questions concerning the location, nature, and extent of power controlling human conduct. And then also this section that you already read of Cartesian, in its solitude, however, was to be that of a king. In the Cartesian model of the person, there's no egalitarian dualism between the thinking head and the body machine, only a master-slave relationship, since the primary task of the will is to dominate the body in the natural world, right? That we are, by virtue of believing that there is spiritual stuff and physical stuff, we are unable to have a body mind. We are stuck thinking, my arm hurts instead of I hurt. We are stuck, unable to like properly navigate the world. We're sort of like having our well poisoned by ourselves, by our own like cognitive frameworks.
Yeah, I was thinking too of, I'm not like a fan of dieting or diet culture. I think it's very problematic, but like if you are trying to eat healthier and you kind of, you do get that kind of, if you think of it's a master and a slave, like all of a sudden the slave is kind of rebelled, and you eat a bunch of sugar that you didn't want to eat, and you feel shame for it, when really it's maybe your body just wants some sugar every so often.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But now you have to, when you eat the sugar, you also have to eat the shame. And so, like, how many calories of effort do you have to put into that sugar? Like,
Yeah, and there's you can go buy Weight Watchers or some kind of other diet product. Then
can subscribe
go buy,
more to the
go buy
culture.
the ice cream, and it's just they're
Right.
selling it to you both ways.
And then when you fall off the wagon, you can say like, well, I'm already off. And this is my experience, like trying to quit smoking for a long time was, well, I've already smoked a cigarette today. I guess I'll smoke a pack, instead of being like, I'm not all the way through with this cigarette yet. I can just put it out right the fuck now.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I guess the other line, I mean, that she's getting into the weeds of Descartes and Hobbes here, but what I had the line here was, against Hobbes, it was the Cartesian model that prevailed, for it expressed the already active tendency, democratized the mechanisms of social discipline by attributing to the individual will the function of command, which in Hobbesian model is left solely in the hands of the state. As many critics of Hobbes maintain, the foundations of the public discipline must be rooted in the hearts of men, for in the absence of an interior legislation, men are inevitably led to revolution.
Right.
That's cool. In Hobbes, complained Henry Moore, there is no freedom of will, consequently, not of conscience or reason, but only what pleases the one with the longest sword. I don't think that's charitable to Hobbes. It's just like Hobbes said that this couldn't socially be synced correctly because of the impulses and the interests of people. But I don't want to discuss modern philosophy here. But yeah, so she's kind of going the Foucauldian route of putting saying that Cartesian prevailed over Hobbesianism. And I can see that how in democracy, I mean, you see this kind of narrative in Democracy in America and stuff like that. But I think the Hobbesian is there alive and well and strongly, as James pointed out.
And it comes out, with this kind of the Marxist theory of fascism, that it comes out when capitalism is threatened. The Hobbesian tools come out, and then along with the rubber bullets and nightsticks and stuff.
Yeah, and the rubber bullets are themselves like meant to be a reminder of, this could be a real bullet. This could be an artillery shell. This could be a bomb. This could be poison gas. It's like the every weapon wielded by the state is an implicit threat of how much more grave the weapon could be. Right.
Yeah.
And you're right about Hobbes. Like, she does kind of give him pretty short there, because he did say that the state can't just kill you. You can defend your life. Right.
Oh yeah. I mean, Leviathan is a lot deeper than is presented here and everywhere, frankly. But yeah, this also reminds me of the Jacobin issue on crime, the one before last. But there was this wonderful article about, it's kind of a new way of looking at the 80s and the 90s and the 70s. With of course, with the neoliberal revolution comes this kind of episodic increases in crime, which overall they go down, but there is a petitioning by the liberal class of and even but by Black people who have come to higher classes for the state to respond to crime, which is then petitioned to the police state, rather than, for example, which they definitely could, for liberals to roll over some of the new liberal policies, which they themselves started with Carter. But of course, it was kind of made hyper under Reagan. Even Reagan had to start raising taxes in his second term. Well, so even though you could have reinvigorated the welfare state and respond economically to the root of these social causes, the left and what became known as the New Left, especially in Britain, the New Labour Party, just choose the police state to respond and to discipline. Mandatory minimum sentences, all this stuff. These are kind of the liberals' works. So yeah, I guess in a sense, the externalization of this discipline in our time, of course, she's talking about another time, does reflect, I think, more of the Hobbesian, although the Cartesian model is similar in function.
Sure. I think that the Cartesian model is, I think they both are, but for different ways. I think that the Cartesian model is especially needed for its transitional value at this time, to sort of like go from theism to deism or something like that. That you get to have God as a bootstrap function for logic and reason. And now that logic and reason are here, like, God can kindly dissolve into nature.
Right.
And that's always there. That has to be there, right? Back to this sort of art science split, or the magic religion split. It's also the experience thought split. It's the one follows rules, the other one makes the rules. And so Hobbes is the art. Hobbes is the magic. Hobbes tells you how the rules are made. Descartes tells you how you follow the rules. And the good subject follows the rules. The good ruler makes the rules, or something like that.
Yeah,
They are like
yeah.
they are, both, sides of the coin or whatever, or they need to be present so that you can oscillate back and forth, because the ruler has to show restraint, because we're not in the era of the prince anymore. The ruler has to show restraint with a rubber bullet, but has to have an executioner's axe, or a hypodermic syringe now, right? They have to have the death penalty in their back pocket as a threat at once. Like, it must always be simultaneously a death threat and a promise of a restoration to social order.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
and I think it's that exercise of power is again kind of swinging back into more of expression of brutality. While in Hobbes as a realist, it was mostly focused on the potentiality as form of a development. Now we're talking about. I mean, we see it every day with what's about to transpire. For example, with criminalization of abortion again.
Right.
It will be a clear expression of the state power over certain subjectivities. And here we read, I have here in the page 151. I'm glad to always go back. I just have minimal notes on these. It says here, the conflict between the Cartesian theism and Hobbesian materialism was to be resolved in time in their reciprocal assimilation.
Yep.
In the sense that, and we've said this whole time, in the sense that, as always in the history of capitalism, the decentralization of mechanisms of command through their location in the individual was finally obtained only to the extent that a centralization occurred in the power of the state. To put this resolution in terms in which the debate occurred, the debate was posed in the course of English Civil War, neither the diggers nor absolutism. Of course, we already met the diggers and absolutists, and this is the time that Hobbes writing, but a well-calculated mixture of both, whereby the democratization of command would rest on the shoulders of a state always ready, like the Newtonian God, to reimpose order on the souls who proceed too far in the ways of self-determination. Yeah, right. So she's saying that, right. Yeah, there's both of our in work, and one kind of comes into the forefront based on need. Mm-hmm. And that's a Hobbesian model, of course.
Right, yeah. Right. So it has a very a living physics to it in that way.
Yeah.
In the paragraph before that, I think this line halfway down where it says, if we do privilege as feudal Descartes, we miss the fact that the elimination of the religious element in Hobbes, i.e. the belief in the existence of an incorporeal substance, was actually a response to the democratization implicit in the Cartesian model of self-mastery, which Hobbes undoubtedly distrusted. This makes me think about, what you're just talking about with Supreme Court and this notion of the sort of rise of the religious element. Well, I'm going to keep reading actually for that. As the activism of the Puritan sects during the English Civil War had demonstrated, self-mastery could easily turn into subversive proposition. For the Puritans appealed to return to the management of one's behavior to the individual conscience, and to make of one's conscience the ultimate judge of truth, had become radicalized in the hands of the sectaries into an anarchic refusal of established authority. Example of the diggers and ranters, and of the scores of mechanic preachers who, in the name of the light of conscience, had opposed state legislation as well as private property, must have convinced Hobbes that the appeal to reason was a dangerously double-edged weapon. And I think it's this like moment that we're in right now feels similar, because ultimately what we see out of the Puritans is that despite their nominal reference to individual conscience, they did not believe that their individual conscience should stop with them.
Right.
They believe that their individual conscience should apply to everyone else.
Through the
Which is
state.
always the fucking Kantian, maximization, Confucian kind of problem.
Right.
Yeah,
for it to become universalized, and that's partially because of the democratization of the work, right?
Right.
I mean, yeah, there is the control of culture, pay women less, put them in subordinate positions, devalue their spaces in society, shackle them in more family and traditional manner, and when that doesn't work, to teach them a certain types of behavior that is distinguished from boys and men, if you will. And when that doesn't work in the Cartesian model, or works but not good enough, you switch to the state, which is again like a 50-year project to make the corporality as a determinant in their kind of social function, right? And it doesn't stop there. With you can't have an abortion, and then of course we'll pull women out of workplace, and
Sure.
the bourgeois society. Now you have to now like any crime or felony, was there a conspiracy? Who was part of this conspiracy?
Sure.
What was the attempted conspiracy? How do you stop a crime from happening, right? Like all these are going to need police power, right? You're
Right.
talking about a medical field becoming an important part of forensic science of stopping that crime from happening, or determining if that crime has happened, infanticide or whatever you want to call it. All these are going to happen, by the way. There is no going back. This is going to happen. This is in works. But yeah, this would be the Hobbesian model of the externalization of the Cartesian model. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I guess I want to say something and then I'll qualify it afterwards. I think that the current trend has wed itself to an internal contradiction that will fall apart like fascistic things do, because they're just like their own enemy. But of course, my qualification of that is like, that doesn't make it appropriate or say we should lean back, because the lives that will be lost and suborned in the process are an unacceptable cost to that. Just a recognition that these things will happen, but they are also radically opposed to the capitalism that the same people hold so dear, right? That you can't just like take this amount of people out of the workforce and expect capitalism to keep growing. It's
Look
like
at
literally
Germany. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right. I mean, just like Germany, Japan, the United States, like we don't have enough people to support capitalism for the coming generations.
Right.
Because it's growth. Growth needs workers.
Right.
And you take half of the population, you can't, you need it in all aspects, and you need these people to be there.
Yeah.
So right, and what that's going to do is going to be very interesting, and seeing how the bourgeois will the bourgeois will side.
And yeah, there are these trends, especially in Japan, you mentioned, but I think we probably talked about this, like instead of giving people incentives to have children if they want to, they're going to bring out the Hobbes and force people to have children.
Sure.
It's
No,
like,
I guess I'm
uh,
saying in the sense of keeping women out of the workplace through to abortion. And not all
Yeah.
the and
well,
not all
forcing them
the
to have children and take care of them,
oh, of
going to keep them
course.
out of work, at least those who can have
But
children.
I mean, this is a problem of like the mechanism of police. One of the mechanisms of policing of the working population is white supremacy, or in the case of Japan, for example, is a sort of um, an ethnic supremacy whereby they don't want immigrants, right? And we have these like the birth rates problem that people imagine to be the operating conditions of the Great Replacement, um, is them saying it's the wrong baby who's being born, right? And so it must be white women that are policed into having children, and the concomitant sterilization of women of color or whatever, right? And so like this isn't an issue at all unless you're operating from a white supremacist framework. That's the only reason there is a need for these people to pull women in, is because they're just saying white women. They're just not saying the white part, right? In this country anyways, right? That's specific to whatever region you're from. But if this is like the mechanism of policing that capitalism uses to coerce the population coming back to bite itself.
Yeah, I don't know if I think white supremacy probably is secondary to. I mean, of course, there is gender discrimination, but and I think before that is again that economic disempowerment. I mean, look, boys are shooting up school. I mean, white boys, but I'm going to, nothing deterministic in the white gene, right? I mean, it's good. It will be kind of present in most demographics, and not specific to class, right? I mean, these are not poor kids shooting up usually.
Sure.
And I think part of that is an expression or seeing or inability to see a future where there is a future, but it's specifically the way it's experienced. I think it's this idea of what do you call it, like being black pilled. But before you even have the chance of being black pilled, like young boys who have not even like yet been like in breakups or rejected, and
Sure.
already like or having like a job that is under a woman or whatever this ridiculous fucking grievances are, as
Sure.
real as their experience. I mean, I don't know, like hierarchy, making a hierarchy out of these, like how much that it helps, but I just think it's down the line from this economic despair that is very much felt, just adopted from the previous generations.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know if
I
it's
think
economic despair that's.
intertwined, if anything, but go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I don't have much. I just think they're intertwined. We've talked, all three of us have talked about this before, like what is primary in these things. And because I'm thinking of, we talked about this before too, chattel slavery and its role in capitalist development.
Right. Yeah, I'm definitely not trying to make
Misogyny.
a hierarchy.
No, I mean, I was, though. I'm not accusing anyone, just saying, yeah.
I'm always trying to break down hierarchies just because build them up.
Well, I was just thinking like, I think that I think about a relative of mine who I hadn't seen in a while, and then was having a discussion with me. They were 15 at the time, and they're trying to relate to me. And they know that, you know, I have like an academic interest set or something like that. And so they were trying to relate to me through Ben Shapiro. And like their statement was, he's such a jerk, but you know, you got to admit he's right about this abortion thing. He calls it like it is. And I'm like, my thought in my head is, you haven't kissed someone. How the fuck do you have such a deeply developed opinion about abortion and who the correct thinkers are about it when you haven't gotten any of the steps towards yeah, towards the sex that creates a baby that you might have to question about whether or not you abort. Like materially it's nonsense, right?
Right. Sure.
And I think this is what you're saying about the grievances, is that materially they're nonsense. Like if you can afford a minimum $400 rifle plus all the accessories plus all the ammunition and drive several hours away because you have your own car, and your parents just have that much leisure money, like you're not actually experiencing economic hardship. You're just imagining that you are.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't have any of this. Like my car has been broken for 6 months that I can't fix. But no, exactly that's what I'm saying. It's just the kind of adopted thing. And that's kind of what the new army of these kids are.
And their parents were too, though. I mean, their parents are operating as though, like, you know, it's the hard work rhetoric. It's the, like, you know, everybody works hard because we're an over-policed working population, and so we say everyone works hard, and no one's willing to acknowledge the way in which they hear something like white privilege or whatever words they hear to describe how something might have been easier for one person than another, like class privilege, or, you know, usually the privilege language set is what people hear this through, right? So why it's so destructive is because it shuts down people like approaching these things honestly, openly, whatever, right? And you know, there aren't necessarily better language sets for this, which is why I think it keeps getting used. But you know, people hear that as they haven't worked hard, and of course that's not true. Like everyone who I'm a tutor. I tutor you know, lots of different ages of kids. I am often tutoring high schoolers who are contemplating dropping out of school and joining the military because school's too hard. And my answer to them is like, if you want to avoid hard work, maybe don't go to the military. It's going to be a little bit harder than school is. I know that school is hard. But, you know, one of those things that you hear as a kid from adults is the adults are dismissing these children's experience of how dehumanizing and alienating school is. And the fact that the adults are correct that their workplace will be worse does not satisfy their complaint at all.
Yeah.
Like this is you may as well ask someone to go experience the Sumerian religion and just say like, well, sure, life is hell, but wait for the afterlife. It's even hellier, you know? Like nobody wants this. It's not a productive framework.
Yeah, no, that's.
I think a better way of putting it, I don't know if it's it's a way I like more than privilege, is from John Scalzi, sci-fi writer. He talks about being a white cis male is like the easiest setting on a video game, kind of easiest setting for life. I think it has a benefit of it's in the language of the people we're trying to talk to that need to hear this, the kind of in black pilled incel crowd.
Sure.
But still, awful, right? I mean, like that's the qualification there.
Right.
Oh yeah, yeah. Not to say that it's easy, and when I
Yeah.
talk to younger people who are white about this, like you have to acknowledge that um, like
Yeah.
you're saying too, the lack of prospects, really, like the American dream, the idea of the American dream, which is still, being pumped out by media and our older generations, but it really isn't there,
Sure.
or it's not believable for most people.
Yeah.
I live in an expensive city, and there's this sort of ubiquitous, it may not be espoused in explicit language, but this ubiquitous critique anytime anybody talks about economic precarity, and they say
Right.
like, well, why do you think that you deserve to be in an expensive city? And it's a really strange response, and it's also a deeply historically situated sort of like extension of colonialism. Like the only reason that you can do that is because we live in a country that's very large, and so they're like trying to say go move to whatever sort of flyover state, go move to Kansas, go move to the bayou in Louisiana, go move to a place where, quote, nobody wants to live, and live
Yeah.
there because that's where you belong. And so like there's this ongoing dispossession that's being reinforced there, while simultaneously saying your needs are invalid. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's real nonsense.
I wonder where this other place is too, by the way.
Sure.
Like, I mean, I was having like, I
Van life?
mean,
I don't know.
huh?
Van life? I don't know.
I mean, shit, that has its own. But having just been around this country in the past years, I mean, I'm always kind of seeing this country. I mean, no part of it is spared. So I don't know. This idea of like go somewhere else. It's like, yeah, everywhere else is more expensive.
Yeah,
Um,
and there's like the historical pushing of people into cities in this book, and the kind of just general trend.
Right.
I would love to live in the woods in the mountains somewhere, but I don't know
Incredibly
what I would
expensive.
do there. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
not as many jobs there.
No, and then you have to have a truck, and then you have to make like fucking Costco runs that are like 3 hours long.
Yeah.
It's
I don't want a
It's
truck.
also a permanent trap. Like it was very difficult for me to leave rural Ohio. It would
yeah,
be more difficult for me to leave rural Ohio now that I am a disabled person.
right,
Um,
yeah,
and I wouldn't have access to healthcare. So that I am being fundamentally told to like go away and die, please. But like
yeah.
do it out of my sight, because I also don't want you do me the courtesy of not making me feel guilty about this.
It's that everything that applied to the homeless
Sure.
population it's now being applied to lower workers. I mean, nothing new, but
Right. And
yes,
that's an extension of sort of the reservation dispossession.
sure,
That's an extension of the enclosures. There's a lot of continuity. Of course, the differences are why we have different words for them, and why it's important to understand that these beats keep happening. And we should not see them as exceptional. We should only see them as analytical moments, so that, because we have to understand, like, this is going to keep happening. This isn't going to somehow work itself out eventually. We're not ever going to get to the kind capitalism unless it's like literally, like the villain wearing the skin of someone else that
yeah.
looks kind, you know.
Yeah, there's nothing natural about it, as we talked about earlier.
Sure.
And yeah, here she talks about on 152, actually, she says, as we pointed out, among the lower classes, the development of self-management as self-discipline remained for a long time an object of speculation. How little self-discipline was expected from the common people can be judged from the fact that right into the 18th century, 160 crimes in England were punishable by death. And every year, thousands of common people were transported to the colonies or condemned to the galleys. There you go. Go to the colonies.
Right.
Moreover, when the populace appealed to reason, it was to voice anti-authoritarian demands, since self-mastery at the popular level meant the rejection of the established authority rather than the interiorization of social rule.
Absolutely.
Yeah, then in the bottom here, she says, in this process, not only did the body lose all naturalistic connotations, but a body function began to emerge, in the sense that body became a purely relational term, no longer signifying any specific reality, but identifying instead any impediment to the domination of reason. Yeah, and then this is a part of biopolitics, of course, and managing body as kind of a relational aspect of kind of social calculus, and moving around doing it to other things, so it loses its kind of personality here. Yeah, I didn't have anything to say there until the next page, but go ahead, please.
That does come up in Socrates. Like that's not like created here, but I think what's going on here is it's being, appropriated for the capitalist machine, because Socrates does talk about philosophy being preparing to die, and you should be kind of thinking and not worrying about whether you're eating and or if it's cold and you're standing in the snow,
leaving your family behind.
Yeah.
I think that this is something we talked about before, about understanding what is actually meant by divide and conquer. It's not often that explicitly British mode of like prop up this tribe and use them to proxy war against the neighbors and use that to clear the land and turn it into terra nullius. Like that's a very specific mode of divide and conquer, but more analogically, we use that to talk about the ways in which biopolicing has been used to sculpt the world. And this section that you read from on 152, as we pointed out, among the lower classes, the development of self-management and self-discipline remained for a long time an object of speculation. And then the last sentence, since self-mastery at the popular level meant the rejection of the established authority rather than the interiorization of social rule. That section is really talking about this this framework on how that's like a historical understanding of how contemporary forms of population sized biopolicing come into effect, where they send you off to a colony and then they make your enemy the indigenous subject rather than the crown that has just sent you overseas to a penal colony.
Right.
And if you try to identify with the indigenous subject or the enslaved subject, you'll die. You'll be killed, or you'll be relegated to obscurity, right? You'll either become Harper's Ferry or just like some person who went native or whatever, right?
Right.
And if you die, well, then there's this very like social Darwinism here. Like you'll select yourself out, and only those who see their punishment as an opportunity to rise to the identification with the master. It's like an inversion of the master-slave dialectic. Once you rise to see this as a just patriarchal punishment, and then you see yourself as a proper colonial subject, then you'll have accomplished what the crown sent you away to do. They didn't actually send you away to punish you at all. They don't give a fuck, right? What they did was they policed their own population with the threat and promise that they could be sent away as well, keeping them in line. And if you step over whatever boundary, then this new god steps in and sends you away. And if you survive, then you become the new frontier. You expand the boundaries.
Mhm.
And of course, you're
Yeah.
accumulating capital over there.
Right.
And you're then they don't have to prop anyone up. They don't have to give anyone anything
No,
over the other.
No,
And
they
you're
just
also
understand
by
your material
surviving-
conditions are more primitive than primitiveness is, right? Because no one ever came into being, no one who was ever any of the hominid species ever came into being without a support network.
But when you do survive, it can reinforce the self-made man narrative.
Right.
It usually is man we're talking about.
Right. They like
And
invent,
rugged individualism of the US.
right. They invent the state of nature, they cast you into it, and then when and if you survive it, then you get to be both the reification of the state of nature and the rugged individualist who transcends it.
yeah.
And you're not, and you're right, you're not surviving it alone. I'm thinking about two Western movies where the sex worker, nurses, all these women that are doing all this kind of unpaid labor to help you survive this.
Right.
Yeah, and she goes here on 153. She says, but the definition of new relation with the body did not remain as a purely ideological level. Many practices began to appear in daily life to signal the deep transformation occurring in this domain. The use of cutlery, the development of shame with respect to nakedness, the advent of manners that attempted to regulate how one laughed, walked, sneezed, how one should behave at the table, and to what extent one could sing, joke, play. While the individual was increasingly dissociated from the body, the latter became an object of constant observation as if it were an enemy. The body began to inspire fear and repugnance. The body of man is full of filth, declared Jonathan Edwards, whose attitude is typical of the Puritan experience, where the subjugation of body was a daily practice. Particularly repugnant was those bodily functions that directly confronted men with their animality, and this is of course excretion and excrements. Yeah, so this is kind of
this is like a social problem because people were filing into cities that didn't have proper kind of hygiene or sanitation.
Yeah.
And then it turns into, oh, the solution is an individual answer of you need to better control your body. You need to control the master of the mind needs to control the body better and follow these more explicit, rigorous rules.
Yeah.
There's not a thing it's a thing that's still happening, like individual solutions to social problems.
Right. Through self-discipline. Yeah, I don't know if I want to. I mean, this Caliban stuff is of course novel, but I mean, this is basically a conclusion of this, how these transformations are happening. And yeah, I don't have anything more to say on this chapter, y'all.
I have one more thing.
Yeah, please. No, just
so on 154, the note for 26. It's kind of just a thing I thought was interesting, talking about the land of cocaine. But the footnote, I'll read the footnote. 26 on page 160. F. Gross states that the name cocaine, or I don't know if it's cocaine or cocaine, first occurred in the 13th century. Cocainiensis comes presumably from kuchen and seems to have been used in a parody since the first context in which it is found as a satire of an English monastery in the time of Edward II. Grouse discusses the difference between the medieval concept of wonderland and the modern concept of utopia, arguing that in modern times, the basic idea of the constructability of the ideal world means that utopia must be populated with ideal beings who have rid themselves of their faults. The inhabitants of utopia are marked by their justice and intelligence. The utopian visions of the Middle Ages, on the other hand, start from man as he is and seek to fulfill his present desires. So it goes on, but I thought that just kind of relates because it's kind of making this idea of utopia impossible because look, you're never going to get rid of these things. You're never going to have that mastery of yourself enough. Whereas the medieval concept is, look, we know what you are. Let's try to make it a better place for the person that you are.
Right.
As you are.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this one up. I didn't realize I had a note here, but this in Cockaigne, for instance, there's food and drink in abundance. There's no desire to nourish oneself sensibly, but only to gluttonize, just as one had longed to do in everyday life. And it reminds me of the song Rock Candy Mountain, his old anti-work song. Yeah, the lyrics of it are very funny. You know, they're talking about like when you get put in jail, they have to let you right out. It literally, as soon as they close the door, they have to let you out. And the only person that was ever hung in the territory of the Rock Candy Mountain was the person who invented work. You know, like all these sort of capitalist issues of like there ain't no short-handled shovels, no axes, saws, or picks, right? It's like if you ever have to dig something, you'll have a reasonable goddamn shovel to do it with. You know, not someone trying to skimp out on a foot of wood while they're like brutalizing your body. You know, so
Yeah.
Yeah, and I get when I'm a kind of utopian, and people and we talked about this I think before in one of my grad school seminars. I was arguing against the liberals, and it was Gadamer, but yeah, people reject it because, well, no, people can't be perfect. People can never be perfected, but you don't have to. You can perfect the world around them. And I think this is why people don't think communism is going to work. You know, we're all just naturally greedy and lazy, and this kind of thinking just reinforces these big Cartesian ideas.
Sure.
That we talked about in the chapter.
Yeah. All right. Well,
and yeah, I like to. We can finish. I'll read the last sentence because I think it's really interesting.
No, that's fine. Yeah, please.
The last paragraph. As we have seen, the body was increasingly politicized in this process. It was denaturalized and redefined as the other, the outer limit of social discipline. Thus, the birth of the body in the 17th century also marked its end, as the concept of the body would cease to define a specific organic reality and become instead a political signifier of class relations and of the shifting, continuously redrawn boundaries which these relations produce in the map of human exploitation. So there's all this emphasis on building up the body, and then just to break it down because it's not really a thing that kind of should factor into the equations of control.
Yeah.
On the Cartesian side, maybe more so on the Hobbesian.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this American pragmatist Bruce Wilshire. He talks about discrete, like the idea of having like a category like a body, or like vegetable would be another one. They're like artifacts of an analysis that forgets itself. Like there's no reality, no biological reality tied to vegetableness, just a culinary use term, right? And though there used to be, I think she's making the claim anyways, which I'm not aware enough to refute, I'll just believe it, that there used to be a biological reality associated with bodiness, or with what a body was, and the body just became ceased to define a specific organic reality and became instead a political signifier of class relations and of the shifting, continuously redrawn boundaries which with these relationships reducing the map of human exploration. But the most important step of that cessation of definition is when we forget that we've changed the definition. It's like when we have fully naturalized the body as a class relations and a continuously redrawn boundary, and fully denaturalized it as a organic entity or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this chapter was kind of did a great thing of talking about 8 things at the same time. And I think it just takes a lot for me to let it sink in, which because one is kind of the conception of the body, and the other is like the relationship between subjectivity and the state and the mechanisms of control. But all this is, of course, happening in relation to development of private property and development of capital.
Right.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird to think about it the way you said it, of how we see our bodies and what we see them for. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me. Do you guys have any more notes to add to this before I stop the recording?
No, I'll recommend a book though. Like I have been.
Oh yeah.
I do one.
Let's
I
do
don't.
that.
Have I done this one? Everfair. I was
What is it?
about
Everclear?
Everfair. No, it's not about the band Everclear or the drink. It's by Nisi Shaw. I think pretty recent.
What's it about? What is it?
2016. It's about it's an alternative history where a group of socialists go and buy parts of the Congo and from Belgium, and just kind of try to create a social society. There's conflicts between the Europeans and the natives, and there's also a lot of steampunk technology, so people get cybernetic hands because at the time King Leopold was using terrorist tactics like cutting off people's hands to get them to gather more rubber. It tells this story in a historical. It takes place in the late 1800s, 1900s, turn of the century. I really like it.
Yeah, I'm reading Forgiveness Work, which is by Arzuo Sanlu, which was a professor of anthropology at the University of Washington. Brilliant person. It's about mercy, law, and victims' rights in Iran. It's kind of a anthropological examination of the kind of legal processes in crim torts in courts in Iran, and how that kind of interacts with in the kind of a ever evolving kind of post-revolutionary regimes of laws, but specifically where forgiveness and kind of victim-centered law works, how it works in Iran. So it goes from kind of grand expositions to, just courtroom dramas and everything. It's just a fascinating read, and I've read her earlier works when I was studying there. So I just picked this up. It's a wonderful work. Yeah.
Nice. Reading Shock Doctrine.
There we go.
And I don't know, I'm a quarter of the way through it or so. And it is talking about the CIA funded what do they call it? Enhanced interrogation techniques research. That's sort of commonly called MK Ultra, or these different projects whereby they trialed hallucinogenic substances or electroshock therapy. That's where the book's getting its name from, in order to erase a person and write a new person onto them. That was something that fundamentally wasn't successful as a program, but it was successful in ways that it didn't like develop a truth serum, which is kind of what they were trying to do more than anything else out of it. Or they weren't able to like just turn someone into a double agent against their will, but they were able to make people very pliable in very specific ways by creating the conditions of their fear and then also alleviating that fear. And our argument is that that economically, the imperial core has learned from this model how to subject the imperial periphery and itself to on a population-wide level to a similar kind of therapy or
yes,
treatment.
Specifically the Chicago school, which kind of takes as its core technique of exporting the neoliberalism through
Right.
the shock doctrine, like because they also use those terminologies, Friedman and those people. Because I'm reading another kind of book on towards antitrust about that for the Chicago School boards and those people. Yeah, no, that book is fantastic. Everybody should read Naomi Klein. No Logo too, the first one. It's a big one.
That one I've read, but I hadn't even heard about this until recently, and it's pretty great. I don't know.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Specifically like talking about historical moments, comparing the insurrection coup d'etat junta in Jakarta with the other one that happened basically the same time, one's successful, one's not, and analyzing the differences between them and what the U.S. state apparatus sort of learned from that, how it used it to great effect against Salvador Allende and these kinds of things.
There's a new book more focused on the Jakarta one. It's called The Jakarta Method that came out last year, if you want to look into it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. And then the other one I'm reading is this How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Noll.
That dude is amazing too.
Yeah, it is. Despite having some, what's that?
If we're showing off all the books we're currently reading, I have a whole pile, but anyway, keep going.
That one is it has a couple seriously cringe spots in it. Indians of the Concrete Jungle, dude. But you're Swedish, man. It's just like so much of my German family where I'm like, you'll have a teepee in your backyard? Come on.
This girl, I did not know this, Mark. One of our in Indian law too, we were doing presentations, like everybody had a legal project, but this person did a Native American culture, as it's alive in cosplay in Germany. And I had no idea that there was this like huge culture of Germans that like go to these camps and stuff and live as Indians.
There's this like strange German innocence stance that comes from like not knowing about the Herero massacres, and that happening long enough ago. And then after World War I, Germany losing most or all of its colonial possessions, and then this sort of like arguing back and forth between Germany talking about how none of the colonial powers should have colonies because it has suddenly realized its how wrong it was to have it. So Germany is like an early adopter of decolonization on a League of Nations stage.
Right.
And then from that is this cultural piece called Winnetou, the blue-eyed Indian, who's like a John Wayne kind of character in Germany. I think those two things together is like Germany imagines itself as being always innocent of colonialism, and then has this like romantic fixation with this particular Indian individual that it imagines is totally innocent because of its aforementioned innocence and colonization. So it's so strange.
Yeah, I
If it
noticed
pisses, if it would have pissed off John Wayne, I'm in support of it, but
Sure, me too. Yeah.
it's better. It's got to be, and I was going to say it's got to be better. We have Americans cosplaying as Germans in a specific party in the 30s and 40s. So.
No, that's true. It's just I noticed that a lot of I really like some of this kind of new folk, kind of Scandinavian. That is kind of more on the darker side. But if you, I always notice that a lot of musicians on these ensembles are Germans or German educated. So I think, yeah, it's very interesting how much kind of nativism is alive and prosperous in the kind of the most modern, if you will, postmodern developed state powerhouse in Europe.
Right.
But then, like you said, there's all this kind of national psyche of dealing with a past that is very ugly.
Right.
As you know, and not just ugly. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, it's also the cultural kind of export of Europe, if you will, if we were thinking in nation state forms. But yeah, but that demonstration like blew my fucking mind, because that was like, she had a lot of pictures and videos. Yeah,
Believe it. I believe all of it.
yeah.
But anyways, Audible Pipeline is a statement that how to summarize that destructive action to take down the machines of capitalism that are destroying the natural world, both human and non-human natural world, simply will happen, is already happening, will continue to happen, and what that looks like. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, he was on Majority Report, I think, last year. So if someone wants to check that interview. Well, all right, folks. I really should go and eat. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.